Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Children's Sexual Knowledge and Behavior from a Developmental Perspective, led by our own Dr. Benjamin Siegel with the Department of Psychiatry at UAMS, and who many of you know through TFCBT training. My name is Anna Kate Bogards, and I'll be your webinar moderator for today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know a little bit about the RBEST program and do some housekeeping announcements. So most of you know, but for those of you who are new to RBEST, RBEST stands for Arkansas Building Effective Services for Trauma, and we're a state-funded program at UAMS in the Psychiatric Research Institute. Our aim is to improve mental health services for children and families who have experienced trauma. We work closely with multiple partners throughout the state to build a more trauma-informed environment and we're probably best known for providing training to mental health professionals on treatments that are effective with helping children and families recover from trauma. So that's a little bit about us. Some housekeeping announcements. We'd love for you to ask questions throughout the webinar by typing in a question in the little question box that you'll see. You might need to expand it, but it's in that box, should be usually the right of your screen. And feel free to type that in throughout the webinar, and then we will take some time at the end to get to as many of your questions as we can. So feel free to do that. If you're interested in earning a CEU for attending today's webinar, just make sure that you stick through to the very end, and I will give you more instructions on how to get that. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll upload it to the RBEST YouTube channel. You can also check out our channel for previous webinars. That's a great place to see some of the other things we've put out there. And also make sure to check out our Facebook page. That's where we like to advertise upcoming trainings, webinars, share resources, and we'd love for you to join us over there as well. So with all of that, I'm now going to turn the webinar over to Dr. Siegel.
All right, well, thank you, Anna Kate, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to lead this webinar for RBEST.
Sorry, Ben, I accidentally muted you.
It's okay. Lead this RBEST webinar on children's sexual knowledge behavior from a developmental perspective. Before we launch into content, I do want to acknowledge the National Center on Sexual Behavior of Youth and CSBY out of the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. I am a trainer for them, and this content presentation is not only presented for RBEST, but representing NCSBY. Anna Kate, could you give me control over moving slides again? Or if you'd advance slides for me, whatever is easiest.
You should have it. If you just have to try a little bit, and then there it goes.
Okay, sorry. Tech challenges. All right, so today, a lot to cover. What we're gonna try and will focus on is discussing kids' development. That kids develop in a variety of domains: social, emotional, cognitive, physically, moral development, their ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, all sorts of different things. And that really shapes that development in those areas, kids' understanding of relationships and sexuality and changes to body and so forth. And so we'll do a bit of a background dive into kids 12 and under. What is typical development and how does that impact their sexual knowledge and behavior, really focusing on what we consider expected, typical sexual knowledge and behavior, and also focusing on given kids develop sexually in a world with friends and peers and family and the internet, um, discussing ways to prepare kids and families to discuss sexuality, changes in body, boundaries, intimacy, friendships, when kids are developing typically and engaging in behaviors that are expected, as well as talking about some strategies and resources to help prevent any sexual behavior difficulties and enhance safety, develop healthy sexuality and development, but also discuss if kids do engage in more concerning or even problematic sexual behavior, what are some resources and strategies to support that? So as I mentioned before, kids develop in lots of different areas. We are focusing on kids 12 and under today, but those preschoolers, those school age kids, they're learning a lot. They're learning about how to interact with others. They are going to school, ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, just an explosion in development. And I do want to preface, when we were talking about sexual development and sexual knowledge and sexual behaviors, we're not just talking about sex and how babies are made and changes to the body. Yes, it is that part of it, but understanding how to interact with others, healthy friendships, healthy intimacy, identity, sexual orientation, respect, communication, all of those are things that kids are learning and trying to navigate as they go through the world. So, we're not just kind of, when we talk about sexual development, not just, names and functions of private parts and things like that. It is more broad. And it's a confusing world sometimes for kids. And so slowing down, thinking about what is it like for kids, in this world of today, and how is that shaping their identities and their relationships. So preschool kids, 6 and under, what are they like? Well, they're curious, and if you have had a preschooler or work with preschoolers, they want to know about everything. They want to know how things work. They want to know how things are similar and different. They learn by watching and imitating. They play out what they see. That's how they learn. They learn through play. They go to the doctor, they have a shot, a well check, they'll go home, they'll play with dolls, they'll play with figurines, they'll play with siblings. Even their adults, their caregivers, getting a shot, because it can be a scary, overwhelming experience to get a shot and see a doctor. And so they try to make sense. What happens, what they see, they act out, they play out. They learn through all of their senses: sight, smell, taste. They're little pleasure seekers. If it feels good, it looks exciting, they're going to try it out. They are very self-focused. They are not motivated by other people's viewpoints or their behavior. They're not self-conscious. And mostly what drives their behavior or impacts after a behavior is immediately what happens. They don't have a lot of long-term or even short-term consequences or ability to really plan and control behavior beyond immediate kinds of consequences. Typically preschoolers, if they get in trouble, they get punished, they avoid doing those behaviors. They tend to do behaviors that they get praise and rewards in that immediate kind of response. Huge vocabulary growth during this period as they're exploring, as they're learning. And so how does all of this kind of shape what we would expect on kids' sexual development and knowledge. And so given they're curious in general and they want to know how everything works and differences, this is going to translate to wanting to know as much as possible about body differences and interactions, and why does someone look different than me, and why does someone have this part and I have this part. Um, they may, if they are going to engage in sex play, it's more of an exploring differences, or modeling or mimicking, caregiver interactions or adult interactions with affection, or playing doctor really is playing doctor. You go to the doctor and doctor checks out these body parts and kiddo plays doctor with their peers. Kids explore. They may dress up as a variety of different adults, from doctors to police individuals, law enforcement, to moms and dads, same gender, opposite gender. And even at a young age, and actually, before birth, kids do have uh, physiological reactions in private parts, and that private parts don't to start to feel good around puberty, that kids can have physiological responses and even positive physiological responses on their private parts within this age range. We typically would call this self-touch, more of a soothing kind of activity, similar to a child that may be rocking themselves to sleep or sucking on their thumb, not the same as masturbation. Kids from a very early age start to pick up on gender role behaviors. They start to understand differences in bodies and how certain genders may act a certain way or present a certain way through socialization and other kinds of things. Their knowledge about body parts and where babies come from and changes in bodies and pregnancy. It's typically in this age range, 6 and under, what caregivers have shared with them. It's vague. This is where you hear things that babies come from the stork and things like that. It's dependent on what caregivers have taught them. Some kids may know more, depending if, they've had a caregiver that has pregnant or been adopted and having some of those conversations. But it's fairly dependent on what adults have had conversations around with kiddo. They're not modest again. They don't like having clothes on. They're itchy, scratchy. They enjoy their nudity. They don't understand why clothes have to be a thing. Um, their sexual behavior, again, is exploratory, intermittent, curiosity driven, modeling or mimicking what's been seen. And, typically those responses, are mitigated by how caregivers respond. If caregivers put some rules and boundaries and consequences, or increase supervision, or teach some rules around privacy, those behaviors do not continue. They'll talk about their private parts and toileting functioning. That is a big developmental milestone, developmental task within this. And so they will talk about all of that and get a lot of enjoyment of that. Typically, kids may use toileting functions as labels for private parts. If kids are using private parts, it's usually not doctors' names for private parts at this age. It may be things like poo-poo and pee-pee and all the things that caregivers have given kids as words for their private parts. So what would you want to teach? Kind of if you're thinking about, gosh, we have a brand new caregiver and, we have a opportunity to meet with them to kind of set them up for healthy development and prepared for having conversations with kids to keep them safe and things like that. What would we want a typical caregiver of a less than 4-year-old to kind of teach a kiddo? And it's basic information that there are gender differences, body differences. We do recommends giving accurate or doctor's names for body parts, including private parts. For safety reasons, for accuracy reasons, of course, we hope kids never have a time where an adult or someone else has touched their private parts inappropriately, but giving kids the appropriate names for private parts and some rules around private parts can prevent and help keep kids safe in the event that someone asks them or encourages them or breaks rules around private parts with them. And so we recommend that parents, caregivers, professionals, body part identification, private part identification. These are fairly simple rules around private parts. Kids at 4 and under, they can tell you rules. If you asked a 3, 4-year-old, what are the rules before you cross the street, or the rules of, pre-K classroom, or the rules of the home, or the rules of the car, they'll be able to give you simple rules. But a lot of caregivers, professionals, do not talk about rules around private parts. And these are simple rules to help keep kids safe. And when kids learn or are taught rules, it is easier for them to follow. General safety information, talking about the difference between okay and not okay touches. Your body belongs to you. What is privacy? Maybe teach privacy along with hula hoop space, where maybe you put a hula hoop around a kiddo and that is their space. And everyone has their own personal space and body autonomy, that they can say no. And what to do if someone does engage in a not okay touch. Who are their safe adults? Who to tell? 4 to 6, similar things. Again, accurate names, doctor's names for private parts, simple explanations about body changes, body differences, pregnancy, conception. Again, simple rules around private parts, personal boundaries. Maybe even adding some rules around self-touch. We'll talk about private part rules in just a moment. We'll get to that. Similar things around safety. You might define sexual abuse or label it as not okay touch, making sure that it's never a child's fault. Again, continuing to teach who are safe people, things like no go tell, say no, try to get out of the situation. If you can't, who are the safe people that you will go tell? And we are earlier and earlier, not just teaching okay and not okay touch, but sometimes adding not okay and okay images related to internet use and tablet use and things like that, and helping kids understand what happens if they see something on television or in a movie or on Netflix or YouTube that's not okay. What do you do? These are the private part rules. These are great rules that, are best to teach prior to a kiddo having difficulty or getting in trouble with exploration around body parts. But they're simple rules. No touching other people's private parts, no other people touching your private parts, no showing private parts to other people, no looking at other people's private parts. No touching your own private parts when others are there, or touching your own private parts when you're alone is okay. Either one is completely fine, depending on if there are concerns around self-touch or not. It is a rule also around hygiene and bathing and toileting and things like that. And kids are also very concrete. So sometimes, we get stuck on it's not okay to do this, no doing that. We also do want to have conversations around what are okay touches within the family and appropriate kinds of situations like hugging and things like that, or how do you show affection or appreciation? There are some really good books to talk about privacy and body part identification. This is just a few of them. Some have been around a while, some are relatively new. There are a variety of sex education and privacy books that should fit most caregivers and families with their values. So take a look, check out some of these resources. Gosh, then we get to 7 to 12, and so many things are changing. Talking about kids' typical development, puberty is occurring earlier and earlier. Some kids as early as 7 or 8, but generally around 10. Kids are changing from not being modest to being more modest, having more of a focus on body image and understanding how others may see them. They are becoming more independent, less dependent on their caregivers. They are building friendships. They have more access to technology and internet. Um, Over the course of these years, peer acceptance, peer pressure are becoming more and more. They are starting to understand the rules of society. And for some, those rules may motivate their behavior. But when we are talking about kids 12 and under, we tend to think a little too highly of their understanding of empathy and morality and what guides their decisions. That kids in this stage are still highly impulsive. Their executive functioning, their stopping, thinking, planning is still developing. And they are starting puberty with hormones, and those all come together, and kids don't always make the best decisions. And most of their behaviors and motivation, although they're starting to understand why we have rules, it's really focused on themselves, that they may follow rules so that they have friends and they fit in, or peer pressure. Their understanding and following of rules is not necessarily, well, I make this choice and how it might impact a other person, or putting myself in other people's shoes, perspective taking, empathy. They're starting to develop that, and that's a skill that takes learning and practice. And so thinking about, your average 12, even 13 and 14-year-old, they're making their decisions based on very short-term consequences and impact on them, and not others. Kids around this age, they're going to try on lots of identities and different things, lying, cheating, stealing, trying to test limits around society and high-risk behavior and all the wonderful things that, if you think back to your own childhood, you may have engaged in. So how does that impact sexual development, knowledge? Kids tend to be quite reluctant to talk to adults about body changes and sexual issues, and most adults are kind of reluctant to talk to their kids or young kids about that as well too. And so when that doesn't happen, where are kids going to get that information? They're going to turn to their peers. They're going to turn to the internet. They're going to be interested in sexual topics and music. They may stumble upon or search out sexual terms in Dr. Google and stumble upon things that are accurate and stumble upon things that are clearly inaccurate and inappropriate for them. They're becoming more aware of changes to body and conception and pregnancy, but it's often filled with a lot of myths and misperceptions. During this age range, kids will be more interested in partnerships and intimacy. Self-touch may turn to masturbation. Their sex play, when we're talking about, 6 and under, they're just pleasure seekers. that those youngest kids, their sex play is fairly out in the open. Um, it may start to become more hidden as we go into school age, but certainly, 10 and up, kids are exploring more one-on-one out of the sight of peers. At friends' houses and so forth. They are showing interest in others. They're doing games still like Truth or Dare and things like that. They may be doing things that we don't like, that can lead to very negative consequences. Sexting is one, having sexual conversations and texts and chats, and even taking a picture that may be inappropriate. We're going to get to that, but these may be ways that kids explore, engage in risky behaviors without the understanding of the long-term consequences. They'll tell sexual jokes and sexual language. They're starting to develop that on-off switch, where they can use certain language and have a certain persona with their friends that may be different than they have with their caregivers or at home. And so, when a caregiver like unexpectedly sees a chat box or a chat on the computer or sees a kiddo's text messages with their friends, they're shocked because kids at this age are, gosh, they are trying to be mini adults and they have a lot of information and access to it, but often inaccurate. So what do we do? What do we teach? What is prevention? We do want kids to have the basics of body parts, reproduction, pregnancy, childbirth, talking about them with the body changes, puberty, prior to those changes, within gender, across gender, talking about risks of sexual activity, initiating conversations around, gosh, family values, religious values, around how would you know when you're ready to date someone or engage in sexual activity. Opening up communication with a trusted adult that a kiddo can go to, as opposed to trying to figure out on their own through trying or asking or Google searching. Talking about what is consent as early as possible as kids start to understand, in sex laws, that the age range that we were talking about, it is illegal for kids to engage in sexual activities, and what could those consequences be. So adding on to all of the kind of safety information that we might have done before, related to accurate names of body parts and okay and not okay touches, who are your safe people, no go tell. We're continuing all of those things. We're, adding about risky situations, peers, electronics, peer pressure, social media etiquette, online etiquette. Talking about dating relationships, building up safe adults to go to with questions. What are good qualities of peers, in friendships and dating? We might add rules like the sexual behavior rules that would be good for 7 to 12, maybe some 13 and 14-year-olds. Again, the more clear, consistent, concrete rules we teach kids, the better to get ahead of it, and having conversations and using examples. So some examples of rules could be, it's not okay to look at other people's private parts. That is in person, that's through technology. It's not okay to show your private parts to other people. Not okay to touch other people's private parts, not okay to use sexual language, not okay to make other uncomfortable with your sexual behavior. It is okay to touch your private parts as long as you're in private and do not take too much time. Again, that is not the masturbation rule. It may cover that, but it is also toileting, hygiene, bathing kinds of things. Some caregivers are not able to get to that. A similar rule could be, it's not okay to touch your private parts when others are there. And again, that might be in one teaching it related to bathing and hygiene and so forth. And again, making sure, we are talking about rules that are okay still within the family. Now, there are, again, lots of books coming out to help caregivers teach just general information about relationships and boundaries and body changes. So check out some of these. Some of my new favorite ones are anything by Corey Silverberg or Heather Corina. It's Perfectly Normal, keeps getting updated. It's now a very thick manual, but several of those newer resources are a little bit more inclusive, diverse in content. So check those out. Build your library if you are a professional in providing services for kids. There are more and more internet resources to help teach and guide caregivers and kids and everything related to sexual knowledge and behavior and development. Amaze.org is a wonderful resource. It is a series of short animated clips, 3 to 5 minutes long, on a variety of topics from, safety, boundaries, sexual orientation, puberty, reproduction, and so forth, that may be easier to discuss with kids now using these resources, as it's in short clips and on the internet. There also is a preschool version, so kids roughly 6 and under, called Amaze Junior, to help with caregivers and parents and kids learning basic safety information. NetSmart's Kids from the National Center for Missing Exploited Children has a lot of resources for families and professionals, even some free PowerPoints that you could download and use in school settings or in your therapy sessions or community presentations on everything related to the internet, electronics, and safety related to that. Stop It Now is a really good, wonderful resource around really trying to prevent sexual abuse and violence. And so check out some of those resources around safety information and good kind of educational materials. So generally speaking, kids will engage in sexual behavior. It is part of growing up, and many of it is typical, expected, not harmful. It's exploring, it's learning about the world. And so, some characteristics of this is that sex play, typical expected sexual behavior, normative. It's exploratory, spontaneous, out of the blue, not happening all the time, mutual agreement. If there are other kids involved, it's mutual agreement. Of course, not all sex play involves other kids, but there's mutual agreement. And if there are other kids involved, it's relatively similar age, size, developmental level. It's not just age. There are more things to consider. You may have, 2 10-year-olds that are chronologically 10 years old, but they may be at very different developmental levels. And so our expectations on sex play may be informed by that. And any sort of exploratory, trying to understand the world and bodies and differences, if it's really sex play, there's never any fear, anxiety, coercion, anger, of fear, negative responses of any of the kids involved. Kids learn by what they see and what they observe, and sometimes their understanding of the world is very concrete. And so having conversations so kids don't try to figure out the world on their own are really important. And, when we think about, prevention and safety and resiliency and, gosh, unfortunately, kids are exposed to lots of different things in the world. Some things traumatic, some things violent, some just confusing. That we do know that, over and over what we see, the biggest important thing is some adult in their life that they go to support them, to navigate, to help them understand. And when we're talking about sex and relationships and body changes, although it is a awkward conversation for adults and kids to have, it is incredibly important to have these conversations. There are some resources, some handouts, just in case you're not aware of. NCTSN, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and National Center for Sexual Behavior of Youth have a couple handouts to talk about what is typical sexual development and behavior in children, to educate caregivers if they come into a pediatrician's office or a CAC or a therapy office or even school, what we consider typical sexual development and behavior. And sometimes, well, lots of times, if a child is engaged in a typical sexual behavior, helping caregivers understand that some behaviors are typical is not a sign of anything confusing or that anything bad happened to them, that it's part of their development and their understanding. And so it may be a time to have more significant conversations about everything related to sexual development and bodies. So what would we recommend? If, gosh, a caregiver finds that kids are engaging in some exploratory, curiosity-driven behaviors. Maybe a caregiver, kids are supposed to be getting ready for, weekend sports activities and changing into uniforms or something like that. And then the caregiver goes into the room because it's taken a while and, opens the door and sees, an 8 and a 9-year-old with their clothes off looking at each other's private parts. And pointing. What would you do in that situation? What would we recommend? And I think what we would recommend is stay calm as you can, stop the behavior, of course, but helping them realize that some behaviors are typical, and it's an opportunity to gather information as to who, what, where, and why, to see if the behaviors have continued before, to see whose idea was it, what happened. And so that's what we recommend. Stop the behavior, separate the kids, kind of ask those who, what, where, and why questions. Do you have any questions? What happened? Whose idea was it? Has it happened before? And depending on those responses, what will we do? Well, maybe it's time to answer some of those curious questions, to teach some rules around privacy and boundaries. Maybe it's time to, okay, we're not going to have changing all together in one room. Maybe it's changing the bathroom one at a time. So it's an opportunity to teach and educate. And despite I think all of us having some concerns around themes around sexuality in media, in the world, in songs, and it sure seems like if you slap a warning on something, you can basically show anything on television and the internet these days. I will hopefully put your minds at ease despite all of that. Most kids get through it okay with the support of caregivers and other successes. They figure out, navigate the world okay. Things like pornography and sex and media and songs, it's not new. It's been around a long time. It may be a lot more easily accessible than it was not that long ago. But just know that despite of all these things being out there, most kids are navigating the world okay through healthy relationships with peers and adults and having these conversations and knowing what to do if someone asks them to do something inappropriate online or they stumble upon a website that is not appropriate for them. But there are some kids that need a little bit more support because it's a confusing world. I mean, they're developing and learning and trying to navigate so many things that some may need more support, more conversations, more supervision related to their interactions. But I do want to caution everyone to always keep that developmental perspective in mind, particularly as we're talking 10 and up, teenagers, early adolescents, kids that engage in sexual behaviors can unfortunately still get pretty heavy labels and described with words like offender and perpetrator and predator and mid-pedophile. Um, when you hear these words, probably what's coming to your mind is an adult who is preying on hiding, sneaky, really needs to be involved in jail and there's no hope, and thinking and planning and, attracted to young children. That is not where we're talking about in kids. Adolescents, school age kids, preschoolers, there's not a link between kids engaging in even concerning or problematic sexual behaviors and adult sex offending behavior. And so we do have to keep in mind that we are talking about kids that are developing in a world that is confusing with lots of mixed messages. And there are lots of reasons why sexual behaviors occur, and trying to understand why they occurred and figuring out how to support the kid and the family in making appropriate choices. Because what we don't want to happen is this example. This was a news story from a few years ago in New Jersey. The story is there were two 14-year-olds and two 12-year-olds, and kids were, and I'm not saying this is an okay behavior. This is obviously not an okay behavior. Two 14-year-olds thought it'd be funny, pulled down the pants of, they pulled down their own pants and sat on the faces of two boys. Thought it was funny, peer pressure, getting someone to laugh. There did not seem to be a history of this behavior, maybe some bullying behavior and other difficult behavior, but the motivation for the behavior wasn't sexual attraction or anything like that. But court systems, adults, we haven't caught up with our understanding of kids need support and what should be appropriate consequences. And so for these kids, they were placed on the adult sex offender registry for life. Now, again, not an okay behavior, but the consequence for this behavior is going to follow them for the rest of their lives. And so we have to be informed and educate others that, we have good treatment, even in cases that are, intrusive, recurrent, aggressive sexual behaviors across the childhood and adolescent age range. We can treat, we can reduce these behaviors. But we have to understand that they're kids, they're developing, they see things, they've experienced things that have shaped how to interact with others, some positive, some negative. And when we are talking about sexual behaviors, it is just a behavior that we can change, it's treatable. We shouldn't be using words like offender and perpetrator and offending behavior and things like that. There's a range, a continuum of sexual behavior. And we spent, the beginning part of this presentation talking about normative sexual behaviors. There is cautionary or concerning sexual behaviors, and then there's problematic sexual behaviors. And when we're thinking about concerning, cautionary sexual behaviors, these are, oftentimes, maybe behaviors that began exploratory and trying to understand differences or curiosity driven that, may have continued longer than we would expect or didn't resolve relatively quickly with supervision and being found out engaging in these behaviors. This might be, I think unfortunately in today's society, I could see a 12-year-old, going over to a friend's house and, two 12-year-olds, over the weekend or whatever, they're thinking about, hey, our friend so-and-so mentioned this website, pornhub.com. Let's check that out. Said it was awesome. So they go to the computer, they check it out, and they see pornography. And the initial reaction is kind of disgust, fear, not expecting to see what they saw. And maybe they're like, okay, done with that. They go about doing other things. So, maybe friend goes over to friend's house again and, okay, let's check that again. And then they do it. And, gosh, unfortunately, although I think that is not okay, and I wish the kids weren't exposed to that, I could see kids engaging in that behavior in today's society. Okay, maybe one of the 12-year-olds goes home and, pulls it up themselves when in private. Then that 12-year-old shows another friend that website. I'm getting close to cautionary concerning at this point. But again, I could still see kids engaging in that behavior. Maybe a caregiver catches the kiddo or checks the browser history, and that is enough with some education. But then what if kiddo then, because there are now blocks at home, pulls up that website on a school computer? Well, I think we're at the concerning cautionary stage now. And so what would we do? We maybe some prevention work. It doesn't mean, gosh, we're going to do, 3 to 5 months of weekly treatment. It may just mean, this is the time to be connected with a therapist or someone that's knowledgeable and, managing sexual behavior. For us, for me, this would be what we would call PSB prevention, PSB light, or sexual behavior light. Caregiver involvement, we would focus on meeting with the caregiver on what is typical sexual development, and within that larger developmental context. How would we respond to typical sexual behavior? Some education on the internet. And okay, well, pornography's been around a long time, but pornography is a little bit different on the websites than it was when many of us were kids. And so maybe educating on technology and access and all the ways to access the internet, from phones to tablets to uh, refrigerators. Working with caregiver on supervision, some good parenting behavior management strategies. So if kiddo is not able to make appropriate choices with technology and computer, then kiddo does not get access to that until supervised, until we work towards a plan that kiddo can make better choices. Teaching clear rules around private parts, boundaries, safety. If there is curiosity, trying to figure things out, sex education conversation, help kids make better decisions with some impulse problem solving kinds of skills. But it's typically, fairly short term, and a lot of behaviors that are in the cautionary concerning range, with support and having a caregiver involved and understanding the world today and what is typical versus not, supervising better and responding better to those behaviors, and along with the kiddo seeing that I can come to my caregiver with questions and get accurate information, and learning rules and understanding consequences of behaviors, that after 2 to 6 sessions, it is not a concern anymore. Now, if this example, kiddo continued to find ways to look at pornography and getting around blocks and things like that, despite our work or some really good supervision strategies by the caregiver, we might consider that more problematic. And so these are behaviors that, are potentially harmful themselves or others. We wouldn't expect developmentally to occur. There is not a diagnosis. Problematic sexual behavior can occur often in the context of other disorders, such as PTSD. Of course, not all kids that have problematic sexual behavior have experienced trauma, but some have, particularly the younger the kids get. We tend to see higher rates of kids that may come into or referred for problematic sexual behavior. We may see higher rates of sexual abuse within those youngest kids. One explanation for that is, again, thinking of those preschool kids, youngest kids, they learn through play. They don't have more sophisticated ways of understanding things. And so if someone has broken sexual behavior rules or engaged in a not okay touch or sexual abuse, they may engage in those behaviors with others or dolls. And so again, not all kids with problematic sexual behavior have a trauma history. Some kids are just very impulsive and having trouble making appropriate decisions and following rules in general. Or some kids may have deficits in social skills and understanding of boundaries, and trying to fit in with peers, and peers are taking advantage of this, and saying to kiddo, wouldn't it be funny if you did that to this person? And all of a sudden they've engaged in problematic sexual behavior, and kiddo may not understand the consequences of that. So generally, when we would label something as problematic, if there's ever any harm to any of the kids involved, we're also looking at developmental considerations. If there is a divergent or gap in ages, developmental ability, sizes, behaviors that occur longer than we would anticipate, interferes with social development, and how often are these behaviors occurring? And a big one is what happened after a caregiver or some adult, or it came to be that someone has found out that kiddo engaged in sexual behaviors, that most sexual behaviors will decrease with typical parenting strategies and supervision and conversations. And if they've continued, it might be more problematic. Now, there are good resources, if you want to know more about problematic sexual behavior and treatments and supports. Again, NCSBY has some good handouts. National Children's Alliance has some handouts, particularly for families that come into children's advocacy centers. Safer Society Press, Taking Action booklets. There's a booklet for kids and adolescents that you can download for free from that website. And then technology, and gosh, I could spend days talking about technology and its impact on kids, and I think I have already, but just we are talking more and more about it within treatment, because kids have access to a lot of information that is concerning and easy, and they're not making good decisions related to it, from sending images to posting images, that may have legal consequences, or bullying and trauma consequences if that picture is then shared with a school and things like that. And so it's a challenging time for kids, and all the more necessary for us to have these conversations. Again, this is just an example in Maryland. This was an older kid, consensual, over the age of consent act, but recorded it and then sent it to friends. And this individual was charged with producing and distributing child pornography, which, yes, there is now child pornography out there, but that was not the intent of it. And so the courts are struggling to catch up. So I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to speed up just a little bit so we can have some time for questions. And I'm certainly willing to stay on a little bit longer than the hour for any particular questions. Kind of alluded to this previously, but there are lots of reasons when we talk about problematic sexual behavior where it might come from. Kids could have been exposed to pornography, sexuality in the home, experienced sexual abuse. The majority of kids do not have problematic sexual behavior. The majority have not been sexually abused. So there are other reasons. A large factor actually is what's been modeled in the home and community. Homes, communities with violence, coercion, domestic violence, harsh parenting practices where, poor social emotional regulation has been modeled. We see that in a lot of our PSB cases. As I talked about before, some kids are more impulsive in general, or having trouble or difficulties following rules in general, and rules around body parts are part of that. And so, working and correcting PSB and reducing PSB may be part of a larger, disruptive behavior disorder treatment. And then what goes on in the family, and anything that gets in the way of a caregiver being able to teach, model, support, protect, can have an impact on lots of different things, including, the development of, challenging behaviors and sexual behaviors. So we're not all doom and gloom. We don't want to focus on, gosh, trauma, and some of these things may make it more likely, or may be part of the kiddo's history and developing some concerning, cautionary, or problematic sexual behaviors. And gosh, there's a lot out there that kids really shouldn't be seeing or engaging in. There are supportive, protective factors that help kids in a variety of different factors, including their sexual development and sexual health. And we talked earlier in this presentation on how do we get ahead of making poor choices? How do we initiate conversations with kids and caregivers, have these conversations before body changes, or before they're interested in someone, or before someone asks them to send a picture of their private parts on the internet. Over and over, it is having some type of caregiver or adult or safe person that the kiddo can go to ask questions, to provide guidance and supervision and teach what is okay within our family, within our society, within our religion, within our community, related to relationships and boundaries and sex and intimacy and so forth, along with helping kids learn appropriate decisions when they experience something challenging, unexpected, not okay images, not okay situations. And not forgetting, the more successes kids have in any domain, the more it's going to protect them from any future difficulties. So building kids up, self-esteem. Sorry, I'm just having trouble navigating, skipping too many slides. So very quick wrap up on problematic sexual behavior, cautionary, concerning, when it's not that typical sexual behavior, all kids, uh, whatever they look like, may engage in problematic sexual behaviors. If you are going to talk about treatment, it is a family-based treatment. So we do not do treatment on problematic sexual behaviors without caregiver involvement. Oftentimes, if kids engage in problematic sexual behavior, it is among kids that they know within the family, within extended family, and so brings a lot of stress. Systems may become involved. There may be separations. There may be a kiddo that experienced PSB who may have trauma symptoms. There may be split alliances. There may be caregivers who lose supports in extended family and blame. And so it is a family conversation and family support. It is a serious situation, and it's not okay that kiddo engage in those behaviors, but there is hope. There is support. Learn and know the myths and misperceptions about kids with sexual behaviors, concerning, problematic, that they're not going to grow up to be sex offenders, that they're still kids. And if we give them correct information, answer questions, teach them rules and boundaries, answer the questions around sex, we'll see those behaviors decrease. If any of you are clinicians, these are the skills that we know from research that are most effective in reducing sexual behaviors, problematic sexual behaviors. Working with caregivers, help them manage a behavior. Sexual behavior is a behavior. Help them learn clear, consistent rules, building up positive relationships, catching kids when they're following appropriate rules, following boundaries, getting ahead of the behavior, appropriate consequences, teaching kids rules about boundaries, relating to others, sexual behavior rules, helping them be safe in unsafe situations, prevent that, sex education, and helping kids learn better problem solving. What we know is, for kids, things that came from adult sex offender treatments, relapse prevention, cycles, all those kinds of things, what we know from research is they didn't help, or they might have made kids worse. And so treat kids like kids. We know our treatment, PSB-CBT, or cognitive-based approaches that are developmentally appropriate for kids. We know short-term and long-term, that when kids get short-term treatment, follow them for 10 years, for instance, juvenile justice, child welfare, adult criminal system, that even short-term 12 outpatient sessions can have a huge success rate. 98% of kids do not go on to have any kind of sexual incidents with short-term treatment, which is the same as kids that never had sexual behaviors. So just very quickly wrapping up content, with treatment, we also see other improvements in other areas. We try to do the least harm as possible. If we do have a kid with PSB, evidence-based is community-based short-term treatment. Kids can remain in the school, they can remain in the home if there is adequate safety. If any of you are interested in getting or participating in evidence-based treatment for kids with PSB. This is the model with the most research support for kids 12 and under, 14 and under, PSB CBT. You can check out that website. This is what it looks like for all you clinicians, particularly those that have learned CBT approaches or TFCBT. These are the components, the modules within PSB CBT. These should look fairly similar to CBT approaches and TFCBT. Another opportunity for those of you that have completed TFCBT training through RBEST or other sources, we have developed an advanced training in TFCBT to support TFCBT clinicians who finished training, intro training, consultation calls for kids 12 and under when kids have trauma-related problematic sexual behavior. So their PSB is under the umbrella of PTSD symptoms, where we'd be doing TFCBT as well, just incorporating some PSB work. So we're gonna have a series of these trainings in Arkansas. We are having one coming up in January. However, it is full already. So I apologize for that, but we're gonna be doing them at least annually, so be on the lookout for that. Just so you have it, you can download the slides, but this is what it would look like in TFCBT while also addressing PSB within TFCBT. There are lots of good resources for sexual development, PSB. One-Op is one of the newer resources. There is actually a self-paced learning curriculum for assessment, treatment, clinical decision-making around kids with sexual behavior, NCTSN, NCA, and so forth. So take a look at those. I will leave you with a quote. Children are like sponges, writes Tony Cavanaugh Johnson. They absorb the behavior, values, attitudes, and feelings of those around them. The youth who have learned these behaviors, attitudes, and feelings can learn new, more beneficial behaviors. It's crucial to remember that these worrisome sexual behaviors are just developing. No deeply rooted patterns have been set. Children change rapidly as they grow up. They're malleable and can absorb healthy attitudes, behaviors, and feelings about sex and sexuality. Providing a sexually healthy and safe environment is essential for their future development. With treatment, community-based supervision, and monitoring, recidivism can be reduced. Victims can heal, impacted kids can heal, parents, caregivers can be empowered to help to continue the shift towards health and wholeness, working on the front lines with their children and families. Anna Kate can guide you through the CEU code, but here it is. And I know we're at the hour, and so if some people have to leave and sign off, you can always follow up with me by email or Anna Kate or RBEST and get questions answered. Anna Kate, what do people need to know about the CEU?
Thanks, Ben. That was a really wonderful, informative webinar. And thank you for, I think what's really helpful about information about sexual development and about problematic sexual behaviors is to understand that what kids are going through can be normal, and when it's abnormal, we can help them. And there's hope for it. And I really love that hopeful message that we share around it, and that you shared resources around training and resources we can share with parents. And so we'd love to share that with you. I'll be sending that out, the slides from this presentation, where you can click on those links for those different resources that Ben shared. If you'd like to get a CEU for this presentation, I will be sending out an email with a Google form. And if you reply to that form with this code, 1811, then you'll be able to fill out the information and it will send you a CEU right back to you. And also, since we're out of time, we don't really have time to get to a lot of questions, Ben, but if any of you have any further questions, then please feel free to reply to my email that I send out, and I'll make sure that Dr. Siegel can help you with that. And I think that's all we have for now. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Ben? Dr. Siegel? I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, I'm not formal. Ben is completely fine. Thank you for that summary, Anna Kate. That is the hope of the presentation, that kids do develop, and there are some normal sexual behaviors and knowledge, and that's okay. How to respond and resources, and that even if a kiddo does get in trouble or has more significant or concerning sexual behaviors, there is hope, and we always have to remember that they're kids and that there is support. So yes. Respond to the email with any questions. I'll make sure they get answered. And I just appreciate all of your time today, and I wish you the best of luck.
Wonderful. Thank you guys, and stay tuned or not stay tuned, but we'll be sharing a webinar next month as well. So have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Thank you.